In this video, we're going to have a look at how we can configure an app so that it is suitable for being used as a game. So if we think about games running on mobile devices, quite often we want to have all of the screen space available for the use of displaying your game, so we'll set it up that way. And there'll be a few other small things. So normally on a tablet or a phone, if you don't touch it, the screen auto dims after a certain period of time. If we're playing a game, we probably don't want that to happen. We want to, even if the user's not touching or providing input, we still want to keep the screen fully on, fully active, displaying whatever's happening within the game. So we'll have a look at how we can set up a basic app to provide this type of framework. In later videos, we'll have a look then at how we can add in a renderable surface, things we can draw things to, and then how do we actually draw things to the screen and so on. So first things first, we'll start off creating a new Android project. We give it a name, so this will be whatever you're going to call your projects. I'm just calling it my super game. Normally you give yourself a sensible domain. I'm just going to go with the default. Click on next. You've got an important choice then in terms of the minimum APK. So for example, if I go for KitKat, at the time of recording this, it'll run on roughly about 50% of devices. So you would generally pick a version that gets you good reach into the market and provides the features that you want. From our point of view, KitKat will do. It'll be sufficient for this one here. So I'm going to do next. And then we're asked what type of basic activity do we want to create. Now I want to create an empty activity. This will be minimal. It's going to be a couple of lines of code. That's all we're going to get out of it. But it'll be our starting point then that we can configure and do a little bit of setup on. So we'll do next with that. We're asked to, if we want to give the main activity a name, you could call it the name of your game, for example, if you wanted to. I'm just going to go with the default here. And we do want to generate a layout file alongside this. And we'll change that. We'll do a little bit of configuration to the layout file as well. So click on finish. It's then going to go and create the project for us. So we didn't, if we have a look at what we have within this here, there's not really that much to it. We have a manifest file. We have one Java file called main activity, and you can see it here in the main window. It's remarkably short. And inside our resources, inside layout, we have activity main. And that was the bunch of XML that got to be generated along with that particular activity. And for us, for purposes of this video, the manifest, the Java file, and the layout file, these are things that we want to tweak or to change, to configure. But we'll start off first of all with the main activity class. Now, you can run this here, and probably you should run it if you're following this along. If you run it, you get a standard Android application. You'll have a title bar or a status bar at the top that'll say My Super Game. What will be displayed is actually as described within this XML. So we'll have relative layout, we'll have a text view that displays the word Hello World. So running this, you'll see your title bar, you'll see Hello World, and that will be it. So we want to change this. So the first thing we'll do is we'll move it to full screen. Now to do this, we need to go into our main activity Java file. I'm going to change a few things. At the minute, main activity extends app compatibility activity, and this is a built-in class that gives you backwards compatibility with older versions of Android. I'm just going to ignore that. So I'm going to go for activity. It's displayed in red because it's not part of the import, so Alt-Enter adds it into the import. So when I extend this, you'll see that now we have activity added in, and the app compatibility activity has turned grey because it's imported but not used. I'm just going to delete it. Now, nearly there. If we want to set up the window, it's the onCreate method is the relevant point. This gets to be determined what is displayed when our activity is up and running. We want to configure the window, and we have to do that configuration before we set up what is actually visible in it. So in configuring the window, we need to do that before we set the content that's displayed in that window. So just after the call to the superconstructor, inside this we want to get access to the window that we're using. and there is a handy get window method. Now this will return the window that that activity is using. Windows has to add that into the imports, so now I have window added in. When to configure the window, and there's lots of useful methods. So I can do window request feature. I want to say window feature no title. So this will request that the window doesn't have a title bar at the top. We want to have that. Window, I'll do add flags. A little bit cumbersome. So Window Manager has some layout parameters. For example, of those, flag full screen. So this will set it up to be a full screen window. And I'm also going to do flag keep screen on. So that will request that the screen is kept on the whole time. Now, this is good. This is basically the only setup we want there. If we think about keeping the screen on, this is something that, the reason screen dims is that we do not drain the battery. So if we're keen to keep the screen on, we have to go and ask the user's permission to be able to do that aspect within the activity. How do we do this? It's actually within our manifest file. And this would be the location if we wanted to add in access to the camera, the ability to get access to the file storage, any permissions that we want to ask of our application, which get to be displayed to the user when they install it, and the user has to accept that he or she is willing to accept those permissions for this application. So our manifest is where we add these things in, and inside the manifest we can add in a user's permission. The name that we're going to do, actually it's the first one there, is WEC-log. So we will add that in first of all. So there we're saying for this particular application, it will ask permission to keep the screen on, that it's not going to automatically dim out. If you want to do another one, so for example, we could do one for external storage. So if we wanted to save our game to the SD card or whatever on the phone, and we wanted to get permission to write the external storage, then that's how we would do it. There's lots of other things you can add in here. Just do one there, say uses feature. So if we're going to write an application that requires a certain feature to be available on the phone, we can say that we can basically indicate or signify that within the manifest. So I can do the name of the feature. So let's say we were to do, it's a bit of a mouthful, Android hardware, touch screen, multi-touch, distinct. Okay. So Android required then is equal to true. So if we added this in, it basically is saying that we require a device, we use a feature, and it has to be a screen that supports multi-touch. It's not just single touch, you can have multiple touch points on the screen, and it is definitely required on the phone. And by putting this into our manifest, then it means that if we have this up in the App Store, things that don't support that, they're not going to get to see this application, because there's no point displaying things to the user that couldn't possibly run on their device. Okay, so that's most of the setup there. And again, if you're following this along, run the thing. You'll see now that we've gone for a simple, there's no title, we'll just have a fully white screen with Hello World written as the text view element. And if you're deploying an actual device, the screen won't dim. Okay, now a few other things we want to do. Not in this video, but in later videos, we're going to create a surface that we have full control over, that we can draw to and we can render our game to. And that's what we'll do for drawing all of the different bitmaps that we have available. Now we want to do a little bit of setup in this one that will help us do that. By default, we've got an activity, and we want to add a fragment into that activity. And the fragment, in a later video, we're going to set it up so that it basically is a renderable surface. We can draw it to it. We've got to do that initial setup first of all. So we're going to add in a fragment to this, and we'll link that fragment into the activity. How do we do this? Easiest way to do it is to go to our Java file. We'll do a new, and down under fragment, we can add in a blank fragment. So I'm going to click on that. It'll bring up a screen, and we can then type in the type of fragment name that we'll put in. So I'm going to call this here, let's just call it my GameView Fragment. So we will create some XML along with this particular fragment to help describe it. In the later video, whenever we're configuring the fragment, we won't need any XML because we're going to create a fragment that draws itself. It takes full responsibility for what is drawn. And that's actually what we want, because we want to draw bitmaps out. But for the point of view of this configuration one, we'll create some XML along with the fragment just to get something displayed. Fragment layout name, we'll go with the fragment GameView. That'll be okay. There's a few other ones you can include. Fragment factory methods, we'll turn that off, and interface callbacks, will turn that off. So these are things we don't really need. And I'll click on finish. And it has given me two new files. I've got a GameView fragment, it's displayed on the screen, which basically has an empty constructor and has a basic overload of the onCreate view. Fragments, much like activities, they go through the normal Android life cycle. There is an onCreate. There's also an onCreate view when the view of that fragment gets to be put together. And all we're doing inside this is that we are saying that the view of this fragment is whatever is described in that layout file. And inside my layout, we now have a fragment GameView, and this describes the layout of that particular fragment. So the layout then is using frame layout. We're matching the width and height of the parent. We've got a text view, which basically says hello blank fragment. So it doesn't really do much to it. Now, nearly there. The last thing we want to do is to get our activity to use that particular fragment, so that whenever the activity is being displayed, we'll add in a piece of extra code that will create basically an empty display for the activity, and then add the fragment into that particular view. If we want to do this, there's a couple of things we need to be able to do. So we're going to do this through Java code. In Java code, we're going to be saying create a new fragment and add the thing in. When we say this, to add it in, we've got to be able to say what we want to add our fragment into. Now, we want to add it into the activity main, this thing that gets to be created and associated with the activity. Because we're doing it through code, we have to have some way of then identifying or pointing to the thing where we want to add our fragment into. And this is where our IDs come in. So by default, our activity main doesn't have an ID. And if we want to be able to refer to it within code, we've got to give it an ID. So we'll do that. And in fact, in doing this, we'll do a few other things. We're going to tidy up this file. So text view, we're not really interested in. We're going to take that out. Padding, we're not really interested in having any padding in this. We're going to take that out. The width and the height, we'll keep those the same, and the other bits the same. Right. So this is basically stripped it out. We're not interested in padding. We're not interested in any text views. We want a blank chunk of XML that we'll add our fragment into that will render the whole screen. So we need to give it an ID, and it's going to say it's a new ID, and we will call it activity main ID. That will do, and we'll save that. Now that means then that our resource file will have been updated, and we'll now have an ID that we can refer to by name whenever we want to access it. So we can do this inside our main activity. And let's have a look at doing this then. So down here, we want to do this basically at the bottom. So we set up the content view equal to activity main. And if you were to run it at this point, you'll see we'll just have a blank screen and nothing being displayed on it. which is fine because that's what the XML describes. XML describes for the layout for activity main, it's basically empty, so that's all we'll see. Now, we want to create a new fragment and add the thing in, and there is a usual pattern for doing this. Inside Android, you have a Fragment Manager, and we'll call it FM. And it is a class that is responsible for being able to add and manipulate and otherwise deal with the different fragments. It's a Fragment Manager, as you might expect. So we want to get it. If you think to the Android lifecycle, we can create an app, we can go away, we can come back to it. So we want to do a check here on create to see, have we already in the past created the fragment and added it in? Or is this the first time that we've run this activity and we haven't got anything yet created? Okay, so we're going to check here to see, does this fragment already exist? Now, it won't for the first time, obviously, but for other times it will. So we want to get out, we're going to try to get our fragment. So GameView Fragment, which was the name of the fragment class. And we're going to try to get this. Oops, nope, GameView Fragment. We can do this here by going to our Fragment Manager and asking it to find fragment by ID. And if we go to the resource file, the ID will have activity main ID. And we'll do OK in this. So this particular line that I've added in, we are going to our Fragment Manager. We're asking it to say, do you manage a fragment? And we're giving it the ID of the fragment. And there we're asking it to go to look for that fragment in the activity XML that we have already created. So this was the one that we gave a name in here, activity main. So this one particular line says, okay, for the Fragment Manager that is associated with this particular activity, off you go, have a look with it, and to see if there are any fragments attached to that particular activity that we can get access to. And if there is, we know it's going to be of type GameView Fragment because that's the only one we're going to be adding into it. Now when that runs, either we'll get it or it'll be null if there's nothing yet there. If it is null, so it means that we haven't yet created one, then we do want to create it. How do we do this here? We just simply say GameView Fragment is equal to new GameView Fragment. We haven't added it into the constructor, but that will create a new empty fragment. And we want to use then the Fragment Manager to add that fragment into the activity. So we do Fragment Manager, we have to begin a transaction. We want to then add in a fragment, and we're going to add in a couple of things. You've got to say, well, where are you adding the thing into? So we're adding it into activity main ID. And what fragment are we going to add into activity main ID? It's our GameView fragment. Okay, and then we have to commit that particular change through. So we've chained a number of different commands together. That's how the Fragment Manager works. We're going to begin a transaction. That transaction is only going to contain one action. We're going to add into our main activity the fragment that we've created, and we're then going to say commit it to actually do the thing. And that effectively is it. So if you were to run the thing now, you would get to see that the fragment, the contents of the fragment are then displayed on screen, and we'll have a hello blank fragment being popped up on the screen. So that's really all I want to do. So we've done a little bit of setup here. We've created a new empty activity. We've changed it so that it uses the whole screen, that there's no feature or title bar at the top, that it's not going to dim if we're not touching the screen. And we set up our permissions to do this. And we set up a few other permissions as well, or requests for getting access to the SD card and things like that. That was our main configuration. Because we want to create our own renderer to control exactly what is drawn to the screen. We don't want to use XML. We want to have full control. We haven't done it in this video, but we're going to do it in the next one. We're going to set up a custom fragment where we get to determine what exactly is drawn to it, and we'll do that in the onCreate view. As our midway house to doing this, we created a new empty fragment that did actually have some XML, and we simply linked it into the activity. So that's our arrangement. How we will move forward from this is that we will create our own custom fragment renderer where we have full and precise control over it, and then we'll build our game up around that in terms of us determining what is drawn, and it'll be our game objects that we draw together. Worthwhile going through these steps for whatever project you're using. If you're using some of the example code, okay, you have a look to see how it actually does it, because these are the building blocks, the fundamental building blocks that help us configure our gaming application.